Hello everybody and welcome to Wildlife with Effie Wild. This is episode number 8 and I'm here with something I'm calling All Art is Erotic, which is a quote from Gustav Klimt, who is one of my favorite painters. I started this spread off with the deep urge and desire to do a fan, which is something I just learned how to paint. So it was one of those things where I had just finished doing a spread for a lesson that I was teaching in a year of Rumi, which is one of my year-long offerings where we engage with quotes by Rumi. And I wanted to do another fan almost immediately after completing the first fan because I loved the process of creating it so much. The quote came almost near the end of my process where I was just thinking about how fans feel and what they remind me of and how sexy they are, and I went looking and found this amazing quote by Gustav Klimt. So it was one of those serendipitous moments where, you know, the universe aligns in a way that works for me, and that was just super fun. I'm starting to spread off with some Stabilo All pencil and some pen, and I'm just playing at this point. There's no real plan for this. It's happening in my weekly planner on one of the pages that I've already filled in for the week, and I put some scrapbook book paper down, and I believe that this has a layer of clear gesso on it just to make my life easier, because clear gesso creates a new ground, it seals in the paper, and it lets me use whatever mediums I want without obscuring the background that's already there. So this paper will stay kind of in the background, looking pretty and doing its thing, and I won't have to worry about the paper pilling or anything like that because of the application of the clear gesso. So you can see here that I'm activating the Stabilo All pencil. All hail the Stabilo All pencil. If you've never tried this tool, it is amazing. I use it almost every time I come to the art journal because of its ability to work with water. It's very reactive to water. Starts off as a kind of a charcoal-y looking ink, and then when you apply water to it with a clean brush, it just spreads and bleeds and looks grungy and beautiful, and it's one of my favorite tools for face making. It's one of my favorite tools for these kinds of initial sketches, and I use it all the time. The stuff does necessitate the use of Workable fixative because it will continue to smear long after you put the stuff on. So usually once I've done whatever it is that I want to do with the Stabilo All pencil, I'll add a layer of Workable fixative by Krylon, and that will seal it in and ensure that it doesn't move as I continue to apply layers. There was a lot on my mind when I was doing this fan about embodiment. I was thinking a lot about how something like this that is out of my comfort zone kind of drops me into a really embodied place. It's almost as though working with this kind of skills building where I'm trying to figure out how to best represent these things that I want to represent in my art journal through specific imagery gets me out of my head and into an incredibly calm state of being. It's very therapeutic for me to do this kind of skills building, but it wasn't always. It used to be that when I would come to the page with a desire to experiment with something that I wasn't quite sure how to do, or that was not quite in my wheelhouse, or it was new to me, I would come to the page with a lot of anxiety, with a lot of fear of failure and messing it up, and I was always just a little bit tender about the whole thing, like maybe I can't do this, or maybe I shouldn't try, or those kinds of sort of voices in the head that happen when you're a rank beginner can be really intimidating. But over the years, I have learned to just trust these impulses to figure it out, to learn on the page. And the worst thing that can happen is I make something I don't like, and then I can start over, or I can keep working it until it's something that I like. And that sense of embodiment is really healing for me, just getting out of my head, getting into creating the kind of muscle memory that you create when you practice making something that maybe you're not too familiar with making. These kinds of skills building exercises I find are really, really good for me. So I just wanted to be with this fan. I just wanted to like experience what it was like to create it. I worked with a template at first and then just kind of went in with my own instincts and let my instincts take precedence over my thinky brain. I'm using colors that I really love. In this case, this is green gold from Golden Fluid Acrylics, one of my favorite colors. I just thought that it would make a really beautiful, transparent layer on top of the scrapbook paper, and I was right. It just looked absolutely gorgeous. And I'm doing this just to kind of make a distinction between the fan itself and the background, and it worked out really, really well. Glazes are something I do a lot in my work. It's one of the reasons why I love Golden Fluid Acrylic so much, is because you get this transparency that allows whatever's happening in the background to shine up through. You're just changing kind of the color without actually changing anything else. I love working this way in layers. I like to layer a lot. Layering is definitely my jam. It's also a way to become very grounded. I kind of think of layering as a reverse excavation. Instead of digging down in layers, I'm building them up, but as I'm doing that, I'm becoming more and more in touch with and familiar with whatever might be going on in my internal landscape. It's almost as though my brain gets out of the way during this process, and then the body can allow its own wisdom to arise. Embodiment is definitely one of my life goals. I really like to spend as much time in that space as humanly possible. But that's very difficult for a trauma survivor because the body can feel really tense and braced and dangerous. So it's something that I've definitely been working with, especially lately as I've been doing some somatic experiencing with my therapist around the trauma that I've experienced in my life. Art is incredibly therapeutic. We all know this. It can allow us to learn things about ourselves that we might not otherwise have an opportunity to learn. And for me, one of the things that I learned from doing this kind of process, where it's just all the tiny details for an extended period of time, where I'm just sitting with whatever I'm working with, I've got the music going, is that this whole experience is incredibly sensual for me. There is something very dropped in and engaged and physical and visceral about this kind of work for me that is very healing, because again, it helps me to get into a very familiar place with my own body. And there are not many places in my life where that's possible for me. Cooking maybe is one of those places, but art has definitely taken precedence over pretty much anything else. I used to be a writer. Writing was my primary practice, and I've always felt that all acts of creation are very erotic, that it allows us to tap into that sort of juiced up sense of being in the flow. It's very visceral for me to be in the act of creation. But there's something about writing that takes me out of my body and actually puts me right into my brain, what I like to call my talker self. And that self isn't really all that helpful most of the time. It's got a lot going on there, what with the brain gremlins and the worries and the anxieties. It's useful in terms of planning and making sure that my ducks are in a row and that I've got a list to slay, but it's not very useful for being in a relaxed state or being in an embodied state or being in a state where I feel really comfortable in my own skin. Working with visual art has definitely been a gift to me in that arena. And when I say it's erotic, you know, I'm not necessarily talking about sexually erotic, even though there is a component of that whenever you're working in any way that allows you to be in your body. It can feel very juicy in that sort of sexual way. But I'm thinking about more like a spiritual eroticism, where in the act of creation, we are in union with the divine in a way that we don't really get to be otherwise. You know, there's something about creating something that puts you right into a kind of a marriage with the divine, at least as I understand the divine. It's like you become a co-creator, and through the act of this kind of creation, it's like a dance and a seduction between your embodied self and the universe, and then this thing comes into being where there was nothing before. It's really, it really feels like that to me. It really comes through me in that way. So, you know, I didn't mean for the whole erotic thing to scare YouTube and maybe chase off subscribers, but I did want to touch on how important it is for someone who is healing from violations in the arena of our sexuality, of our sensuality, to have this kind of a practice where you can experience sensuality in an incredibly safe way. I don't think that there is a safer way to experience just the intense sensuality and embodiment that comes except through this kind of practice. All of the little marks I'm making, all of the little details that I'm adding, I think of as something I call effort as offering. And we do this a lot in my classes, where we find ways to just really embed whatever it is that we're working on with a lot of our own personal energy. So rather than go for the quick trick or the easy way, you will find over and over again in the lessons that I teach that we're going to look for something that allows us to really flow our energy and embed the energy into the piece we're working on. And I consider this almost a method of prayer. It's almost like praying the rosary or chanting or doing a mantra or something like that. It's like a effort that you expend, energy that you expend as a prayer to the universe in order that you may attain your desires. It's a huge part of the kind of art witchery that I teach in Moonshine, and even in Book of Days when we get into the little tiny details. There isn't really any time that I come to the page where it isn't spiritual. And for some people, spirituality and eroticism have been separated. There's a compartmentalization that happens there between sensuality and spirituality. A part of that is patriarchy, a part of that is just the way that we here in Western culture handle sensuality and sexuality. But for me, as a neo-pagan and someone who's been practicing in that realm since the late 1980s, the two are definitely intertwined. And whenever I am engaging spiritually, I'm engaging as much as humanly possible with my whole self, including my sensual self. The sensual self, when it is left behind or left out of my spiritual practice, like that just is not fulfilling for me. I need for there to be something sensual and visceral and even erotic in my spirituality in order for it to feel very fulfilled. There is something very subversive and feminist about including sensuality in our spirituality, and I feel like this fan is a really beautiful symbol for that. It's an emblem of that for me. It's like the fans have such a rich history. They've been used by women as a tool for flirtation. They're used to flash the eyes in a way that is very sensual and show off the face to its best advantage. There's a coquettishness that I associate with fans that feels very sensual to me, and then again that brings me right into the realm of spirituality just because of the way that my spirituality functions. So it's kind of a ramble today, guys. I've had a really busy week. I've got a lot going on. I'm in the middle of team building for Book of Days for 2020, which means asking really big asks of people that I respect and admire. Do you want to come and work with me? That can put me in a really tender state, really vulnerable state. So I've been spending a lot of time doing self-care around imposter syndrome and making sure that I'm asking the asks, because as hard as it is, it's necessary so that I can create the very best program possible for you for next year. I've also had unexpected visitors this week and a lot going on in the realm of my own personal work. I'm taking fresh paint with Flora Boley, which has been keeping me really busy. We work in series, and that's been really fascinating. And if you follow me on Instagram, you will have seen some of the work that's coming out of that. I've also got filming that I have to do for various classes that I'm teaching this year. So it's all been a little bit of a kerfuffle. Getting things done has been on my mind, and my personal art practice hasn't been suffering at all, but stuff like this where I have to like sit still and record a voiceover have been kind of put on the back burner. So this is really all I've got for you today. There will be no extended version for Patreon. I may do a little writing for you guys over there in Patreon, but there will only be this one recording, just because this was the time that I had this week and this was the topic that I had, and there was really nothing more that I had to say about it except there is no safer place for me to play with embodiment, to be with embodiment, than in my art journal and in the process of experimenting and playing with color and line and form and shape. And it's a really sensual experience for me. All art is erotic. I absolutely love knowing that. I love knowing that when I create, I'm in a kind of a marriage or a dance with the divine that really informs my spirituality. Thank you so much for listening, and I will see you all in all of our places. Lots of love, you guys. Bye.
Check it.